Bernie bloody Ecclestone. The man, the myth, the in no way legend. F1's ex-boss can't seem to keep himself out of the headlines these days, whether it be from telling Lewis to brush aside racist comments, to defending Vladimir Putin, and this just in, tax fraud. He is, if nothing else, a unique character. So today, here at Crash, we're taking a look back at the life of Bernie, from his childhood to his time running F1, to see just how we got to this point. So let's not waste any more time and get into it. Bernie Charles Ecclestone was born in Suffolk, England on the 28th of October 1930, officially making him really old. His father was a fisherman, yet the appeal of that career didn't quite hook him, as instead he began to work in a local gasworks whilst pursuing his real passion of motorcycles on the side. After a while, Bernie turned this hobby into a career, forming Compton and Ecclestone with his business partner Fred, a motorcycle dealership where they would sell and trade spares, repairs and everything in between. And it was here that he would have his first brush with motorsport, as in 1949 he had a crack in the 500cc Formula 3 series, achieving some decent results and a few race wins before packing it in to focus on his business. This lasted less than a decade though, as in 1957 Bernie returned to motorsport, this time as a manager of British F1 driver Stuart Lewis Evans, a decent enough racer who over his 14 starts in F1 secured 2 podiums and 2 poles before sadly passing away due to burns sustained from an accident at the 1958 Moroccan GP. This incident resulted in Bernie once again taking a break from the sport, however this time it was just for 1 year before he came back to manage Austrian driver Jochen Rindt, who tragically met the same fate as Stuart on his way to winning the 1970 World Championship, which although must have been hard for Bernie, by this point he'd already committed to a career in the sport. It was just a thing that happened at the time in the 70s and he just sort of had to get on with it. And so he turned from driver management to team management, buying the Brabham team in 1971, where then over the course of 17 years a truckload of famous names would pass through his doors, such as Carlos Reutemann, Niki Lauda and Nelson Piquet, as they rode a number of highs and lows through the years, from being backmarkers in 76 and 77 to drivers world champions in 81 and 83. He eventually sold the team in 1988 for $5 million, as his other roles within the sport were taking up most of his time. As you see, during his time at Brabham, he also helped form the Formula 1 Constructors Association, which he would soon become the chair of in 1978, with fellow ex-racer turned F1 businessman Max Mosley as his legal advisor. The FOCA wanted more money for the teams, which nowadays makes sense, but the FIA at the time weren't too keen on the idea. They eventually gave in though and allowed appearance money for all the teams. However, the real war began when it came to who controlled and sold the TV rights for the F1 races. Since that, when it comes down to it, is where all the money is, and thus that's where Bernie wants to go. On one hand, Fokker want to control it, on the other hand, the FIA. And to put a long story short, the feud between the two was long, saucy, and for my simple mind, way too complicated to get into here. But all you need to know is that in 1987, Bernie won, and formed a new company to control these rights, known as the Formula 1 Promoters Association, later renamed Formula 1 Management, aka FOM. The terms of the TV rights agreement resulted in the revenue being split 47% to the teams, 30% to the FIA, and 23% to the FOM, which was basically just Bernie. Now, love or hate him, the man was smart. Bernie had gone from a no-name driver manager to the big boss collecting stonks at F1, and throughout the 90s as his friends and associates also rose to positions of power, including Max Mosley as he became the president of the FIA, and Charlie Whiting, Piquet's old mechanic at Brabham, to race director. He was basically becoming the Thanos of F1. Away from the sport though, Bernie, for lack of better words, became lost in the sauce. After his first marriage came to an end, he remarried in 1984 at the age of 53. Can you guess how old the bride was? Here's a hint, Bernie is loaded. I'll give you some time to think about it. Are you done? If you said way too young, then you're correct, as 26-year-old Croatian model Slavic Radic became an Ecclestone. And to be fair to them, their marriage did last a while, having 2 kids together until they eventually divorced in 2009. So who knows, maybe after all she really did love his personality. Back in F1 though, Bernie and his merry men were making some great progress in amplifying the sport and its popularity and safety. Obviously along the way though, there are a few road bumps in F1 and in Bernie's personal life, like the time he managed to convince Tony Blair to give F1 an exemption from the banning of tobacco sponsorships by donating $1 million to the Labour Party, and the time he got done for avoiding to pay $1.2 billion in tax, and the time that he complimented Hitler on how he was able to get things done. Despite all of those things, generally speaking, he did a decent job of running F1. As the sport progressed into the modern day, however, Bernie was afraid of a little thing called social media, which ended up being his downfall. As other sports grew a new audience with the use of social platforms, F1 stagnated, and had about as many young fans as bowls. And so, with hopes to change this, Liberty Media bought out F1 in 2016, and soon removed Bernie from his position as chief executive of the F1 group on January 23rd, 2017. Since then, F1 has grown in ways that many longer-term fans like myself could never have imagined, with every man and his dog now knowing about and watching the sport. Meanwhile, Bernie has just seemed to go more senile as time ticks on, as at the ripe old age of 91 now, he's still waffling on and making outlandish and baffling comments, which are at the very least tarnishing any legacy he may have built for himself. Like I said, Bernie was a businessman, and in that respect, he was a bloody good one too. However, as a person, at least least in his later life, he's maybe not so much. Thank you guys for watching, like and subscribe. Until next time, goodbye.